Okay. Now, our Islamic tradition talks about Muslim scientists, how they've really contributed to the world, or the Islamic world, in many different ways, and benefited non-Muslims all over the world. So I would categorize Dr. Muhammad Munir in that category for two reasons. Number one, I see him as somebody who's very upright and just. Okay, because from my understanding of the work that he does and what he says is very coherent to me. Okay, and I have no one who has said anything contrary to that in terms of his character. Number two, one other thing that provides me some kind of support, that Dr. Muhammad Munir is the ideal person to bring to the forefront here, and as one of our panelists, is this particular individual. He engages with ulama. He sits with groups of ulama and he explains to them, and he sits in that. So he has a very good reputation and understanding of how the ulama work in that sense. So for that reason, he is somebody who has an expert understanding about this subject. He's a virologist from Lancaster University, and he has a specific specialist interest on the COVID vaccines and the virology and the pathobiology of viruses related to COVID and various other sort of disease conditions. So before I go further on, we're going to begin first by Dr. Muhammad Munir. Jazakallah khair, Dr. Munir, for joining us, inshallah. We'll just try to get you off mute, inshallah. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear. Thank you. Thank you very much for very nice introduction. I really was intrigued by that. Thank you very much for using wonderful words. I really appreciate that. And I would like to...
We're gonna get you to put on your presentation, and first of all, give us in the next sort of 20 minutes a lowdown of what this vaccine or what these vaccines are all about, inshallah. So
absolutely. Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for the introduction, and also for the invitation to give me opportunity to really get through some of the details about COVID-19 vaccine. So there is a very simple agenda here. What I wanted to bring is really the realities, and also we'll try to put forward some of the key realities so that you can make your informed decision. Just to begin with, as Rafaqat was mentioning, I just wanted to put my research over there just to give you an idea what kind of involvement of my group is with the SARS-2. We have developed the COVID-19 vaccine, which is one of the very few intranasal vaccines. We have completed the preclinical studies, and we're moving into phase 1 and phase 2 trial hopefully soon. And hopefully by the mid of next year, we will be bringing good news about that. That is, of course, recognized by the World Health Organization. And because of this and other reasons, I sit into the WHO expert panel onto animal models and the vaccines. So that is about the vaccine itself. And then recently, we have also developed artificial intelligence guided smart diagnostic platform that can identify COVID-19 within 30 minutes. And last month, we got MHRA approval. That means it can be legitimately commercialized, not only in the UK, but around the globe. The purpose to show you this slide is that I am involved with the COVID-19 at the time when its name was not even identified, back in December last year. So, and my lab is one of the very few labs that work with COVID-19 virus itself, authentic virus in the lab. So all I will be saying is based on my personal experience working with viruses, and that's what we do on a routinely basis. Just to put into the perspective, all the viruses, COVID-19 causing viruses, SARS-2 causing infection in the whole world, can be accommodated on the top of a spoon, on a tablespoon. Okay, and my lab, we have around 2 liters of that virus. So that is kind of environment we work with. Agenda is very simple. I just want to put my timer on just to not to get on. Agenda is very simple. Well, I wanted to give you evidence-based information about why we need COVID-19 vaccines. Okay, that would be just around 4 to 5 minutes. And then I will go into some of the common myths and factual responses. That will take around 12, 13 minutes. And that I will make sure that I will end within 20 minutes. So let me begin with emphasizing the fact that vaccines have been critical in eradicating common diseases. And the data I will be showing here is based on the United States, because United States is pretty proactive in providing the data on a real-time basis. So in every year of the last century, we have had 500,000 measles cases. We have same number around 250,000 about pertussis, mumps, rubella, smallpox, diphtheria, polio, anything that you can think of around the highly infectious viral or bacterial infection. So that's really big number. I mean, back in 20th century, somebody who has a polio. Okay, and I know one of my cousin have the polio that is around 60 years old cousin. But that isn't really the case now. I mean, since the introduction of the vaccines, for example, if we look onto the figure of 2019, we have only 1,200 cases compared to 500,000 last year. So that is really what we are looking about, the impact of those vaccine in reducing the number and reducing the number significantly. For example, if you look now and ask yourself that, do you know anybody in this generation who has a paralytic polio? It's a deadly disease. Okay, but you wouldn't be able to find that, is because we have had vaccine and the history of the vaccine to reduce. And all of those diseases have been reduced significantly, over 90% reduction within very few years of repeated vaccination campaigns. So that is really to emphasize the fact why vaccines are so important. I want to give you a context here because the flu jab is something that we probably come across routinely. I mean, on a yearly basis, we are vaccinated in one or other way. With the flu vaccine, we don't really have a great success. And one of the primary reasons is just because the virus itself is very complicated. It has a segmented genome and it comes up every time in a new version. So therefore, the vaccine success has been variable. So this is a every year's figure. Okay, from 19 to 60% is the success rate in last 10 years. So basically what we have been talking about, the flu vaccine, that is only effective about 50 to 60%, right? But when we talk about the COVID-19 vaccine, particularly focusing on the Pfizer and BioNTech, we are talking about 95% efficacy. So that is significantly higher than the flu. So if the flu jab can be administered to protect against this infection, certainly the COVID-19 vaccine has a scope to do so. Another thing that I would like to quickly highlight is that HIV is a big problem. I mean, it's for last 10 years, it has been declining significantly because of the awareness campaigns and so on. But if we look onto the figure that has been in the UK, for instance, the COVID-19 has caused 63,000 deaths only in the UK. Okay, and the same number is not too variable in, for example, in the United States is significantly higher. So these 63,000 people who have died with the COVID-19, this is more than 20 years that's caused by HIV, AIDS altogether. So that is what we are talking about, the scale of this disease and the importance to have some sort of pharmaceutical or non-pharmaceutical intervention, because without that, this trend will continue and that would be devastating. Just to put into one of the perspective, I would like to put one real case scenario here. Some people think that, oh yeah, well, that is an infection that can go by itself. So therefore we don't need the vaccine. So here is one scenario that was in main US. What happened, there was a wedding ceremony, 55 people participated, only one was the one that was infected. What happened, that person has infected another 177 people, the one who participated into the wedding, and also once they return back to the family members and so on. And what ultimately happened is that 7 out of those 77 people died. And these seven people who have died were not the one who has actually participated into this wedding ceremony, right? So that is the scale we are talking about, and that is the importance we have to refer when we put into the perspective of the vaccine. So one person infected led to deaths in the 7 people, and those were not the one who participated into the wedding itself. So just to put into the perspective, for instance, if you would have participated in here, you are young, you are healthy, you probably won't get severely sick or not hospitalized. But when you come back to your family, there might be people who are having vulnerabilities, and that vulnerability led to the unfortunate casualty. So that is what we have to keep in mind when we make the decision about the vaccine and its importance. But probably for me, coming from a very mediocre family background, for me, the most important really is not the life, it's the livelihood. Life, of course, is critically important, but we do know that over the course of this pandemic, we have saved so many lives. by improved therapeutics, by early identification, by understanding the impact. But just look on to the unemployment rate that has been up just because of this crisis. So here is the figures from the US, but that is not exception with any other country as well. Like in the hospitality, we have like 40% unemployment rate just because of the COVID-19 within 1 year. And more importantly, there is one important survey that has been conducted to ask the people for how many months they can live if they are not employed. You can believe that there are 35% people, 35 out of 100 people you ask, they cannot live more than 1 month on their own saving if they get unemployed. So you can see the impact of this unemployment caused by the COVID-19 crisis onto the livelihood, because not just the livelihood is equally important. So the last bit I want to add about here is the herd immunity. So if we look onto the figure of the herd immunity now, we are having around 20% of the people in the world that are infected and then they recovered, they are having some level of protection against the virus. So if we keep this trend the same way, we got 20% in 1 year, that means to reach 60%, we need another 2.5 or 3 years. And if we keep that trend, that is probably too devastating. We are losing, we already lost 1.7 million people. So if we carry on doing that every year, that's going to be very complicated. So here is like 20%, which we are at the end of December or early January 2021. And if this trend continue, and this continuation can only be achieved if we would have increased vaccination. So more vaccination means lower number of infections and higher and quicker achievement of the herd immunity. So basically, if we start vaccinating the way we are planning in there, by end of next year, we will be achieving 60 to 65% herd immunity. And that is the time when we will be really sure that we will break the transmission chain of this infection and we will be able to protect the vulnerable communities and really curtail this pandemic. So to achieve this herd immunity, vaccine is pretty critical, because if we're going to go through the natural course of infection, that's going to take another 3 years. And then we don't know if the first year immunity is still there or it's gone. So we got to recycle again and again. So just to put into the perspective of the Pfizer and BioNTech vaccine, that it required 3 weeks interval from first dose to another dose, and after the second dose, another 7 days are required to have established immunity. But I would like to emphasize here is that, of course, vaccines are not the magic bullets, and these are not the only source of curtailing this pandemic, but these are very powerful tools. But we don't really know that whether this vaccine, the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, would be able to protect you from getting the infection or transmitting the infection. And people probably need to self-isolate and have to do the quarantine and so on. But that is really certainly something that we are counting very high at the moment, because it can save lives quite significantly. So that is just to summarize the immunity caused by these 2 vaccines, Pfizer BioNTech and as well as Moderna. So both are almost at the same scale. So the vaccines that we are talking about is not just about a couple of people vaccinated or protecting the vulnerable community. If we really want to curtail this pandemic, we have to have 75% of the population in a country, in a continent, or in the global level to be immunized. And for that, we need 13 billion doses. And that is a massive task, a gigantic task. We never practice this kind of vaccine into the human living history. But that is really the start. I mean, if we keep moving the way we are doing now with the rolling out of the vaccine with 1, 2, 3, and 4, we will be ultimately reaching to that herd immunity level. So now, in the last 5-6 minutes, what I will be doing is to go through a few of the more important points that I have gathered based on my experience in the media, or based on my experience with communicating with the people. What are really the main questions? Can we address them through the scientific backing? And if so, we will be providing the public an informed choice for them to make the decision. But I would like to emphasize one thing here before I go into the detail, is that my enthusiasm should not be taken as a mandate. So I will be providing all evidences that I can think are right, and I'll leave you to make the decision, whatever you want to make about your vaccine uptake or not. Okay. So my enthusiasm is really high because that is what I work on a daily basis, and I do critically look on to more scientifically and also on a human perspective, on an ethical perspective as well. So let me take you very briefly on each of this point. The first question that almost everybody asks is about whether the vaccine can integrate the vaccine component into our genome, and that part can be used to either collect biometric, to track people, or to get some information that otherwise cannot be acquired. It is true. I can tell you that there is a possibility that you can impregnate the chips into the genome, but not through the vaccine. But before I go into the scientific rationale, I would like to tell you that human surveillance can be done by many other means, which are much cheaper, much economical, and probably already prevalent. So they don't need to do really the integration of the vaccine component or any of other thing into our genome to track us. Okay, and it's not in the favor of, to be honest, in the pharmaceutical, because they are already struggling getting the trust and confidence. But that is certainly relevant when we talk about three of the vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca. How it is relevant is that, let me put it into relatively simple terms. So our whole body is composed of different cells. And if we look onto one of the cell, our DNA is within that nucleus, it's complete packed within the nucleus. So anything that is related to DNA has to be in the nucleus. DNA cannot come into the cytoplasm, which is outer side of the nucleus in the cell. Right. So in the cytoplasm, it's only the mRNA, which is a messenger RNA, which encode for some of the proteins, and those proteins make our daily life and building block of the body. When we talk about the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, they are based on mRNA, messenger RNA. Okay, so they are injected into the intramuscular route. They go into the cells, and within the cells, they're very short-lived because RNA itself is very unstable. 3 to 4 days gone, destroyed by our clearing mechanism of our body. And that is not only the mRNA that is injected. Our own mRNA will also be degraded within 4 to 5 days through a natural clearing mechanisms. And also this RNA doesn't go into the nucleus. So anything that doesn't go into the nucleus cannot be incorporated into our chromosome or into our DNA, right? And also RNA is a different molecule, DNA is a different molecule. So RNA has no compatibility with the DNA, and DNA is our genome, right? So RNA has to be first converted into DNA, and then DNA would be integrated into our body. But that no mechanism is existing in our body. So all in all, the RNA injected in our body through a vaccine developed by Pfizer or Moderna cannot be integrated into our genome. To put it into the perspective of the AstraZeneca vaccine, because that is also in the front runner, that is a little more different. If they would not use the non-replicating version of the vector, which they are using as a carrier of the antigen, then it could go into the nucleus and could incorporate into the genome. But they are using a virus that is not replicating. So it does not go, so when it enters into our body, it does not replicate. If it does not replicate, it can't go into the nucleus. It will only be ectopic expression, meaning that it is only in the cytoplasm. So anything that is in the cytoplasm cannot go. So ultimate, what I wanted to say is that if anything is not integrated into our genome, it would be very short-lived. Within 4 to 5 days, it's gone. One of the things that is very important is that the vaccines are made up onto aborted fetus or onto the cells. Those are derived from the fetus. Let me tell you very honestly, viruses, they do need cells to replicate. They cannot replicate on their own. They have to invade living organisms, then they make more copy of their own. Bacteria don't need to. Bacteria can multiply themselves, but viruses have to replicate onto some sort of media to make more copies of it. And that's how we make the vaccines. So the vector that we use for making the vaccine has to be onto some kind of cells. And what kind of those cells are? Some of those cells being, of course, derived from the fetus, those being aborted back in 70s and 80s. But those were not aborted just for the sake of vaccine development. Okay, and those cell lines, the media where the virus vector grow, those have been adopted so much and there's been modified so much. Even, for example, the one that is being used in AstraZeneca vaccine, that is completely changed. It's not exactly the same thing as it was in the aborted fetus. So I'm not talking about the religious side, I'm talking about the scientific perspective. It has lost its originality. And that was not just because of the vaccine production. Right. So putting into the perspective of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, the mRNA is purely synthetic. So there is no cell culture involved. There is no fetus questions. There is no any source of the material that come from animal or from the human. So it's a purely synthetic vaccine. So that is applicable for halal, for applicable for vegetarian, for everybody they think of, because it's purely synthetic. The AstraZeneca one, it certainly need to grow, as I mentioned, the vector need to grow onto some sort of cells. The embryonic cell, the fetus cell, these are the cells that allow the virus to replicate more and more. But the important point to understand here is that when they are grown into the cell culture, you make like litters of those, and then afterward you need to purify the virus. So you spin them down, you purify that, and then get rid of all those cells that people think that have originally come from the fetuses. So basically the vaccine that is going into my arm or your arm or will go into our arms will not have those cells. So it would be only the attenuated virus particle that will go into our body and train our immune system. So just to quickly wrap up on 3 points altogether. So there's a question raised about that some of the vaccine, they contain some objectionable components like gelatin, which could be pork origin, or they can contain formaldehyde, they can contain mercury, they can have some other micronutrient that are hazardous for our body. One thing I would like to highlight that the amount of these molecules or these compounds like formaldehyde or the mercury or any of those components, they are first at the same level as our body's own production capabilities. Secondly, they are at the level that is already tested and validated as not hazardous to the body. But when it comes to the gelatin, it's certainly true. For example, gelatin is used for stabilizing the viruses. So it could be extremely important for the stability and efficacy of the vaccine, but that is not applicable for any of the vaccines. So there is no any pork origin gelatin or so within any of these 3 vaccines. Some vaccines can be genetically modified. Yes, absolutely, we can use, because, well, that is the reality. When we make the viruses, recombinant viruses to make the vaccine, we have to go through the genetic modification, because without that, there is no possibility. Because the SARS virus gene is getting into some of those genes that are not naturally carrying those components. So we have to make that. And to be honest, genetic modification is something that we can't live without. From banana to the strawberry to corn, whatever we are eating, some component of genetic modification is already there. And as I said, the mRNA vaccine is purely synthetic. There's no involvement of human and animal sources. It is considered halal, and it's considered suitable for the vegetarian. And that is what is really the nature of the mRNA vaccines. Just last 2 points. Some of the people are claiming that, okay, at one end, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca say that vaccine is very effective, is safe, you without any hesitation, you can go ahead and get the vaccinated. But at the same time, they are applying different governments for indemnity. That means that they have to be protected. I just want to put perspective, because I work very closely with many of the industry partners. But one thing, just to put as a claimer, I don't have any interest in any of the private company, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, or anything. What I'm saying is independent statement, is that vaccine industry hasn't been a very profitable industry. It's probably, this is the first time when the vaccine industry is seeing a major influx of the revenue. Problem has been that if anything directly or indirectly been associated any damage to the vaccine, that is onto the liability of the vaccine pharmaceuticals, the producer of the vaccine. For them, it hasn't been a great success business before. That means that they have to pay all of that liability. To protect them and to allow the pharmaceutical to come into the countries, many countries came up with the Vaccine Damages Payment Act. For example, in the US in 1979, it was introduced. That means if anybody is having any permanent disability or severe disability, they will be paid for 120,000 one-off payment. And this is an enormous amount of money. For example, in the last 40 years, UK has paid 80 million pounds in terms of compensation. And that is not just to emphasize onto the fact that the vaccines are not safe, it's just because government wanted the pharmaceutical to come and do the business. The second last point is about the vaccine is being rushed. Okay, let me put into the perspective that we do need definitely an exhaustive validation. And that's what we've been doing for any of the vaccines I showed in my first slide, that those are very success stories, that we have eliminated almost those diseases just because of the vaccines. But this time in COVID-19 perspective, there has been something very special. And that special is that we have had the first coronavirus pandemics back in 2002, 2003 with SARS, which we call classical SARS, and then in 2013 MERS. Both of them have been the coronaviruses. Out of that, in last 17 years, we have gathered enough information that what are really the targets, how we can build the vaccines, what are the best suitable vaccine candidates. So basically, we can say that, okay, vaccine has been developed in 1 year, but basically that has been based on our knowledge that we gathered for the last 17 years, right? So it's basically, we managed to repurpose those existing technologies against coronavirus very quickly. And there has been unprecedented need. And that is the reason that many of the bureaucratic and political interference has been ameliorated. And just to put into the perspective, when the COVID-19 started, I applied for the government to allow me to work on to the SARS-2. And it took literally 3 weeks for me to set up the containment level 3 facility, which otherwise would take 3 years to establish that laboratory. So because of this unprecedented need, the time has, and basically this is, I always say that it's not cutting the corner, it's basically been cutting the rubbish, cutting the, the bullshit around that. Okay, so another thing happened that this time, probably for the first time, that instead of performing those phase 1, 2, and 3 trials in sequential order from 1, 2, and 3, we have run them in parallel. That allowed us to collect the data relatively shorter time. Okay, but number of people, those have been tested in COVID-19 vaccines are more than actually the one that we would test otherwise in another vaccines, right? So altogether, involvement of the funds, collaboration between the pharmaceutical, between the government, all together have helped to really develop this vaccine relatively quickly. So it's not about cutting the corner, it's around cutting the crap. Right, so the last point I would just like to add is that some people say that, okay, mRNA-based vaccines are new technologies, so therefore we don't have a long-term safety data. I completely agree with that. We don't have massive amount of data. However, one thing I would like to emphasize is that the mRNA technology itself has been in the scientific community for the last 20 years. Okay, so the first mRNA-based vaccine went into the human arms in 2013. All right, so that is at least 7, 8 years of experience we have had with any of those trials. And not only just 2013, every year almost we have had one vaccine going into the human arm. So you can check all of these details about like how many people, how many different viruses being used for. So it has certainly some level of at least the short-term safety profile and the safety data. Right, so that let me to take into last 2 slides, so I will be wrapping up very quickly. Reactogenicity, which in other words is this, the side effects of COVID-19 vaccine might be a little higher than the flu shot for few reasons. Okay, because of the nature of the technology, or you can say that probably we didn't manage to include all those people into phase 3 trial that would have otherwise, for example, allergies, pregnant women or young children, just because we wanted to have a vaccine that can protect the most vulnerable ones. So therefore, emphasis have been around that. But all the short-term side effects, first, they are very minor, and secondly, they are very short-lived. Okay, and most of them, they go away within 3 to 4 days, the most 1 week. After 1 week, there is no any short-term side effect. And that is what we have witnessed with 40, 30,000 people tested. But then there are long-term side effect possibility, but that is very rare possibility. I mean, 1 in 1 million. Okay, and then 1 in 1 million chance is the same. If you take your car out on the road, there is a possibility 1 in 1 million that you get accident, but you don't go outside just because of that. Because there is a 1 in 1 million possibility the plane crash onto your roof, but that doesn't happen always. So that is always there. I don't deny that, but that is really, really rare. Lastly, I want to just put everything into the context and give you a balanced overview. What is our daily risk? The daily risk is that we are having around 4,400 deaths per day, right? And that is accounted to the deaths that we are having already around 1.6 million in 1 year. And we have 71 million infections already, okay? around, massive impact. We never have had that impact anytime in the living history. But that also means that 3 people are dying every minute. So that is our risk. So that is our daily risk. But what we have in response, the availability is that we have a 95% effective vaccine, and that has been tested on 43,000 from the Pfizer case, and in Moderna, 30,000 volunteers. And all those volunteers, they are all fine with the 2 months of safety. So I'm again emphasizing onto the fact, I don't know, nobody know what will happen in the long term, but whatever happen, it would be rare event, and that's what we have to watch out, and that's what people are doing in the trial that has been conducted. But at least for the short term, we don't have any of those in these volunteers. The short-term side effects are very short-lived, within 1 week or gone. So with this one, I just want to leave a question, is that whatever I told you is about the facts, about the scientific evidence, is what I witnessed, what other people have noticed, giving you the daily risk, giving you the available choices. Choice is yours. Thank you very much.
Okay, Jazakumullah khair. Okay, just before we go on to the panelists and start asking questions, Jazakallah khair, Dr. Munir, and we will come back to you inshallah.